A light dusting of snow had settled overnight across the low ridges of northern Alberta. Just after sunrise, along a thinning tree line, a figure moved through the pale quiet. Not fast, not strong. A red fox, lean and limping, pulled his body forward in short, clumsy jerks. His back right leg dragged behind him. Attached to it was a rusted, steel-jawed trap, half-closed, stained dark at the hinge. Each step left behind a thin smear of blood, too fresh to freeze. He was young, just past his second winter. His coat, once thick with red and gold, looked ragged now, torn around the hips where he had twisted to escape. The trap hadn't snapped fully, but the damage had been enough. Tendons torn, skin broken, bone not yet shattered but close. He kept moving, not with purpose, just because stopping would mean the cold would win sooner. On the ridge above, Mira adjusted her pack and scanned the slope. She was part of the winter survey team monitoring old trap lines. Unpaid work, mostly quiet, mostly thankless. She'd seen signs of wildlife that morning. Deer tracks, a grouse-wing print. Nothing unusual. Then she caught the color. Too sharp for this landscape. She dropped low, lifted her field binoculars and saw the stagger. Saw the tail dip. Saw the metal glint briefly as the fox turned slightly in the snow. She didn't call out. There was no need. The fox couldn't run. She moved down the slope slowly, careful not to crunch the ice. He heard her by the third step, lifted his head, then lowered it again. No attempt to flee. No sound. Just stillness. As she reached him, she stopped a few feet away. His eyes flicked toward her. Wide, glassed with exhaustion, not fear. He did not growl, did not bare teeth, just watched. The metal around his leg was old, handmade, probably from an abandoned trapline not properly retired. Mira circled to his side. She kept her gloves on but lowered her voice. "Easy, boy," she whispered. She crouched beside him, studying the mechanism. A single heavy spring, rusted shut in places. No padding, just raw steel. One quick movement and it would sever what was left. She reached into her pack, pulled out a wire saw and padded towel. He didn't flinch as she worked. He only shivered once when the saw teeth scraped against the hinge. It took 6 minutes. Then the trap gave. The leg came free, limp, bleeding, still attached. She wrapped it quickly, not to heal but to stop the trail. Then she wrapped him, gently. First in the towel, then in her coat. The fox let her do it. Not out of trust, but because he no longer had the energy to resist. Back at the truck, she laid him on the back seat and turned the heat low. His eyes closed. Not sleeping. Not peace. Just a deep, cold stillness. She kept glancing at him as she drove. If he moved too much, he could tear the leg worse. If he didn't move at all, it might mean something else. At the shelter, 30 kilometers south, they had space for emergencies. A vet would meet them. No promises, no guarantees. He'd lost blood. He hadn't eaten. The leg might not be saved. He might not survive the next day. But the trap was off. The bleeding had slowed. And for the first time in what was likely a day and a half, the fox wasn't alone. In the side mirror, the tree line blurred behind them, streaked with snow. The old trail would cover over soon. But the mark he'd left, the line of blood, the pattern of a limp, would stay for a while until the next storm took it. If she hadn't seen him when she did, he would have stopped before noon. Not from the wound. From the cold. If she hadn't walked that route, he wouldn't have made it past that morning. That was the plain truth. Nothing sentimental. Just timing. In the back seat, the fox exhaled once, slow and uneven. Then stillness returned. The trap was off, but the risk remained. The air inside the shelter barn held a dry chill, thin and unheated. Mira stepped through the doorway with the fox pressed close to her chest, his body wrapped in a wool jacket already stained red near the bottom hem. He hadn't stirred since the drive, but his eyes were half open now, glassy but aware. They tracked the movement of her boots as she walked across the concrete floor, and once, faintly, his ear twitched at the hum of a fluorescent bulb overhead. She laid him down on a folded towel just inside the exam room and waited. The building was quiet, the staff thin this time of year, but the local vet assistant was on call. Mira kept her hand near the fox's ribs, not touching, just checking. There was breath, shallow, slow, but there. The leg, still wrapped, had bled through the gauze in patches. She didn't try to unwrap it. That would come later. 10 minutes passed before someone else entered. Dr. Halverson, mid-50s, soft-spoken, moving with calm precision. He nodded once at Mira, then lowered beside the animal. No unnecessary noise. No sudden touch. "How long in the trap?" he asked. "Judging by the clotting. Maybe a day, maybe more. He didn't fight much." "That's not good." Mira said nothing. They both knew what that meant. Animals caught in panic burn themselves out within hours, but this fox hadn't even had that left in him. Halverson unwrapped the leg carefully, layer by layer, until the torn flesh was exposed to the cold light. The trap hadn't broken the bone, but the damage to muscle and skin was extensive. The fur was gone from the ankle down. Some areas were already turning a sickly purple-gray. Blood flow compromised, infection beginning. Halverson didn't speak again for a long while. Eventually, he stood and gestured toward the small bank of enclosures at the far end of the barn. Second one from the end. Heat lamps already on. "We'll clean it and decide in the morning." Mira lifted the fox again. This time he stirred faintly. Not a protest, just a shift in weight, a tired lean into her arms. He didn't try to look at her. His eyes remained fixed downward toward the floor. His breathing caught once, then settled. She placed him inside the enclosure, lined with soft straw and a fleece pad, and closed the mesh gate. He didn't move to the corner. He didn't curl. He simply stayed where she'd put him, chest rising, falling. She crouched again, hands on her knees, and watched. A long, uneven silence filled the space between them. Then, softly, she spoke. "You're safe now." No reply, of course, but his left ear twitched again, just once. That night, Mira stayed at the shelter long past her scheduled hours. She checked on the fox twice an hour, recorded his breathing, noted the small changes, the tightening of the eyes, the moment he shifted away from the heat lamp, the subtle flinch when the wind outside struck the tin roof and rattled the walls. He didn't sleep, but he didn't cry out either. Only once did he make a sound. A low, breathless whine, half-formed, pressed into the fleece beneath his head. By midnight, Halvorsen returned and administered a low-dose antibiotic, a pain blocker, and a saline drip. The fox tolerated it all. No panic, no biting. But it wasn't a submission. It was depleting. He had not given up. But he had nothing left to give. Outside, the frost thickened on the windows, drawing white threads across the glass. Inside, the room held steady at just above freezing. Enough to survive, not enough to heal. If he made it through the night, there would be decisions. About the leg, about infection, about whether his body would choose to fight or not. For now, he lay still, not fleeing, not trusting, just enduring. And Mira sat quietly beside the enclosure, her breath visible in the cold light. Her coat still streaked with blood. The trap was gone, but the damage remained, and the waiting had just begun. The third morning began with frost curling along the inside of the shelter windows. Light seeped through the paneled roof, catching dust motes in the air. In the far enclosure, the fox lay stretched on his uninjured side, ribs rising faintly beneath his dulling coat. The straw beneath him had shifted little overnight. No paw tracks, no sign of pacing. Just the impression of stillness held too long. Halverson had stitched the leg late the night before. The outer damage had been cleaned. A slow, careful wash that revealed no broken bone but heavy tissue loss. The foot might recover from partial use. It might not. He'd said as much with a shrug, as if it wasn't cruel to admit. But there had been no amputation. Not yet. The fox had made it through the critical hours. That had to count. Mira arrived early again, same as the day before. She moved quietly, carrying a shallow bowl with soft food mixed down with broth. She opened the gate, slid the bowl in, and waited. The fox didn't lift his head, didn't sniff. He blinked once, then looked through the wire toward the opposite wall. Not at her, not at the food, just past everything. "He should be hungry," she said. Halverson didn't answer. He was taking inventory down the corridor. "He should want something," she added, softer. The fox shifted his weight slightly, not in response, just to ease pressure from the stitched leg. His ears stayed low. His tail twitched once, reflexively, when Mira stepped back from the gate. No warning, no fear, just a motion born of memory, something still left in his body that hadn't shut down. By noon, the food remained untouched. Mira replaced it once. By nightfall, she removed it again. Day 2 passed much the same. He drank water, but only when alone. Never in front of her, never with sound. A bowl would be full, then later it would not be. But there was no evidence of interest beyond that. No paw marks in the straw except the slight drag where he shifted occasionally toward or away from the corner. The wound began to tighten. The swelling came down slightly, but the stillness remained. He didn't sleep, not deeply. His eyes closed only when the shelter emptied, when the motion and footsteps faded. He wasn't afraid of people, not in the usual way. There was no cowering, no bristles. It was as if his mind had separated the possibility of threat from the reality of confinement. He didn't resist the cage. He just existed inside it, hollowed by something no stitches could fix. On the third day, Mira tried sitting near the enclosure for longer stretches, not speaking, just waiting. The fox lay curled now, his head turned toward the wall. His breath came steady, but shallow. The wound no longer seeped, but the fur around it had thinned from grooming, or from stress. She couldn't tell which. In the afternoon, Halverson watched her watching him. He leaned on the metal counter and spoke without looking up. "He's not wild anymore," he said, "but he's not tame either. That's the problem." Mira didn't reply. She just stayed there, knees pulled close, jacket still zipped from the morning chill. The fox blinked once toward her, eyes soft, unreadable. Then he turned his head away again, slow and deliberate. Not aggression, not fear, just distance. It was a quiet kind of suffering, not the kind that made noise, not the kind that fought, just the kind that lay still and waited. And every time Mira stood up and walked to the door, she could feel the weight of his gaze behind her. Not following her, just watching. And when she left each night, the cage door clicked shut with the same soft finality. Not cruel, not loud, but unmistakable. If he didn't eat by the 4th day, the vet would start fluids again. If he didn't improve, they would reassess the leg, the pain, the chances. It was too soon to guess, but they all knew one thing plainly. He was alive, but he was not yet living, and the cage, however quiet, was not what he was meant for. By the 5th morning, the sky above the shelter lightened to a soft, silvery overcast, the kind that made even breath look like smoke. Inside the barn, the warmth held steady under the low hum of the heat lamps, and the air smelled faintly of straw and antiseptic. Mira entered without speaking, carrying the same shallow bowl in her hands. Wet food thinned with broth, a trace of boiled egg folded in. Her boots made soft sounds against the concrete, but the fox didn't move. He lay curled near the back of the enclosure, not facing her, the injured leg tucked carefully beneath him. His ears stayed flat, his tail curled toward his belly. She crouched again, slower now, not reaching in this time, just resting the bowl in the same place near the front. Her hands stayed on her knees. Her breath came out slowly. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's call you Ash." The name wasn't chosen lightly. It came from the way his coat caught the dull winter light, grays threaded with brown, like something once bright that had been dulled by smoke and time. It came from the silence of him, the stillness that never read as surrender, but rather a burnt-out resolve that hadn't entirely gone cold. And it came from something else, the way, even in stillness, he remained present, not gone, just waiting for something to stir again. Ash didn't react to the name, not then, but he opened one eye and held it on her for a few moments longer than usual. Not interested, not recognition. Just pause. Then the eye closed again. Mira left the bowl and backed away. By mid-morning, the food was still untouched, but by early afternoon, it was gone. Not scattered, not pawed through, simply eaten. The bowl licked clean, placed just as she'd left it. Mira said nothing when she saw it. She just crouched beside the mesh and stayed there longer than usual, her hand resting near her knee, unmoving. Ash lay with his head turned halfway toward her, not watching, but no longer avoiding. That evening, she brought another bowl. This time, she didn't leave right away. She set it down, then sat near the wall of the enclosure with her back against the wooden frame, knees drawn in, jacket zipped high against the barn's chill. The shelter was quiet. The other animals were already resting. Halverson had gone for the night. Ash stirred. He didn't move far, just stretched his front legs slowly, shifting weight off the injured side. Then he rose, shakily, stiffly, and limped the short distance to the food. It wasn't graceful, but it wasn't broken either. He paused once beside the bowl, looked over the rim, then dipped his head and began to eat in small, slow bites. Mira didn't speak. Her hands stayed still. When he finished, he turned back toward the corner, then stopped. For the first time, he didn't retreat to the wall. He stood halfway between the food and the straw bed, and he looked at her. Full, direct eye contact. Not long, no longer than a breath held in the cold. But it wasn't accidental. It wasn't a glance. He looked at her, steady, silent, unblinking, and held his gaze. Mira felt it as something shiftless but real. A tether, not a bond. Not trust, not yet, but acknowledgement. Ash blinked once. Then he turned, lowered himself into the straw again, and curled up, this time with his face toward the room, not the wall. It was a small thing, a barely visible moment. But it marked a change. The first turn of a wheel that had been still for too long. He had a name now. And he had eaten. And as the night deepened around the barn, Mira sat there longer than she needed to, watching him rest beneath the glow of the heat lamp. The silence no longer felt like distance. It felt like waiting, together. 3 weeks passed in slow, steady days. The wound along Ash's leg sealed into a thin line of healed flesh, raw pink beneath the fur that would take months to regrow. The stitches came out without struggle. The limp softened. At first, he moved only to shift positions, then to reach the water bowl without pause, then to pace. Small circles inside the enclosure, no urgency, no agitation. Just movement returned for its own sake. He ate without hesitation now. Rested with his back toward the wall, eyes on the barn instead of away from it. And once, when Mira reached through the mesh with a soft glove and held it steady, he brushed it lightly with his nose. No sound, no fear, just touch. Brief and undramatic. They didn't speak about release until the 3rd week. There was nothing dramatic to announce, no ceremony, no tag to track him, no collar to weigh his neck. He was still too light, but not dangerously. The leg had strength. The infection hadn't returned. He could fend for himself. That's all the checklist required. On the final morning, the sky stretched clear above the pine ridge, pale blue with a thin white breath across the horizon. No wind yet, just still air and brittle grass underfoot. Mira drove him north, back toward the wooded edge near where she'd found him. Not the exact place, but close enough to let him recognize the world again. She said nothing the entire drive. In the back of the truck, Ash lay still inside the transport crate, ears low, not trembling, just quiet. At the ridge, she parked, stepped down, and unlatched the rear hatch. The trees curved low here, not yet thick with spring, the ground scattered with dry needles and pale grass just starting to wake. Birds moved overhead in small calls. Nothing loud. No one else was nearby. She carried the crate a few paces off the trail, set it down facing the trees, waited. Then she opened the door. Ash didn't bolt. He didn't crouch. He stepped forward with a smoothness that looked practiced but wasn't. He paused only once to shift weight off his heeled leg. Then he walked, not fast, not hesitant, into the brush. The white tip of his tail flicked once through the ferns. His coat caught the light like old silver brushed with rust. He didn't look back. Not once. Mira stood with her hands loose by her sides. She watched the spot where his form disappeared. The ferns settled behind him. The birds didn't startle. Nothing else moved. There was no moment to mark it, no cue to know it had happened. Just silence returned. She stayed for a few minutes more, long enough to be sure there wouldn't be a return, long enough to feel the quiet take hold again. Ash was gone. The crate remained open beside her. The bowl empty. A few shed hairs clung to the towel lining. Nothing else left. No trace on the ground. No mark in the dirt. Just the pine wind starting up, soft and dry, blowing east. If he survived the next few days, he'd blend again, learn the new weight of his leg, the changed gait, the soft strength rebuilt through stillness. If he didn't, it wouldn't be from neglect. It would be from the world returning to its own rhythm, indifferent but wide. But Mira had seen the way he walked. Steady, straight, clear in purpose, not wild with fear, not soft with attachment. Just forward. She closed the crate and walked back to the truck. The wind followed her across the ridge, brushing through the low needles, lifting the dust in faint spirals. She didn't call after him. She didn't need to. Ash had left in silence, and silence was what he returned to. 2 days after the release, the wind shifted across the pine ridge, coming down colder from the northwest. Mira returned early that morning, this time without a crate, without food, without the quiet tension that had come with every check-in during Ash's recovery. She brought only a coil of flagging tape, a pair of wire cutters, and her trail ledger. The purpose was simple. Check the old snare sites, flag anything still active, and cut what could be reached. Most of the traps left this far out were illegal, remnants of old lines or forgotten setups laid by people no longer watching them. The registry had gaps, and the woods didn't keep records, so Mira and a few others came out when they could, walking the ridges, marking what they found, removing what they had time to reach. It was methodical, slow work, but necessary. She moved uphill through the brush, boots soft against the earth, following a narrow game trail that led along a dry ravine. The air smelled of pine sap and thawing earth, and the frost along the edges of the shade hadn't yet melted. Birdsong came in thin notes through the canopy, scattered and low. She reached the first flagged trap around mid-morning. A wire snare, rusted through, still looped at the base of a fallen log. She marked it and clipped it free. The second was deeper in the brush, half concealed beneath moss and dried fern. Empty. Removed. The third took longer to find. It sat near the edge of a clearing, not a trapline site she remembered marking, but one that matched the pattern. A narrow opening between two trees, a natural funnel. And there, tied to a root cluster, was a length of cable. But this one wasn't intact. It had been torn. Not weathered, not rusted apart. Torn. The wire was frayed in 3 directions, coiled unevenly. Edges freshly snapped, not cut. Something strong had twisted it loose. Mira crouched beside it, running her gloved fingers over the edges. The ground around it was disturbed, not trampled, not dug, but moved. Displaced in small arcs. Something had circled it. Something had worked at it. A few feet away, under the shadow of a low cedar, lay a rabbit. It wasn't dead. It wasn't wounded. It sat still, crouched low, ears pinned, body pressed to the earth. It didn't flee when Mira approached, only turned one eye upward, unmoving. She stopped at a distance, knees bent, watching. There was no blood on the rabbit, no bite marks, no broken limbs. It wasn't caught in anything, but it wasn't moving. Beside the rabbit, a second piece of the wire snare lay twisted in the grass, as if someone, or something, had dropped it there, removed it, then walked away. Mira scanned the perimeter. No prints she could make out clearly. The ground was too dry, the frost too thin. But something had passed through here recently. Something light, quiet, and precise. No predator sign, no chaos, just disruption. She watched the rabbit for another moment, then slowly stepped back, giving space. The animal didn't follow, didn't bolt, just remained there, pressed low to the earth like something waiting for the world to forget it. Mira flagged the area, recorded the wire damage, and packed the torn snare into her bag. Before leaving, she glanced once more toward the rabbit. It had turned its head slightly, still hadn't moved. Back at the truck, she noted the time and distance, then paused. There had been no signs of struggle, no animal killed, no feeding. Just a trap dismantled and a rabbit untouched. It was a coincidence, probably. A fox couldn't do that much to a snare. Not without injury. Not with a leg still healing. Not unless it had learned something. Not about the snare, but about stillness and waiting and where not to step. Still, as she drove back down the ridge, the thought followed her. The trap hadn't been triggered. It had been undone. On the 4th night, snow fell again. Not heavy, but enough to lay a fresh layer across the yard behind Mira's cabin. By dawn, the ground was blanketed in a fine crust, brittle at the edges, clean and unbroken. She stepped outside with the kettle still steaming in her hand, expecting only the usual bird prints near the fence, the sharp claw marks of a raccoon near the compost bin. Maybe the winding path of a hare slipping through the brush. But the yard was quiet, undisturbed, until she saw the tracks. They were near the woodpile, light, narrow, almost too faint to notice. Not fresh falling snow, these were above it, placed after, just hours old. Fox. She moved closer, slowly, not from fear of scaring anything away, but out of a sense that something had passed through with intention. The tracks began at the tree line, just beyond where her porch light reached at night, and made a small arc around the edge of the yard. Not random, not searching. A single wide loop, stopping once near the stacked wood, then curving toward the porch. They didn't go up the steps. They didn't vanish back into the trees. They ended in a soft indentation beside the lowest step, where the snow had been slightly pressed into a shallow dip. There, caught against the rough grain of the porch rail, was a tuft of fur. Just one. Gray with a reddish thread near the root, the kind of coat that blended into both brush and shadow. Ash. Mira crouched and studied the tracks again. The back paw print was slightly off. One toe angled outward, just enough to suggest a past wound, healed but remembered. The print was full, firm, not staggered. He'd been walking evenly, quietly, not limping, not trailing. He'd come to the edge of her porch and paused. That was all. No cry, no scratch at the door. No signs of fear or hunger, just presence. Then he'd turned back. She followed the trail with her eyes as far as the trees allowed. It ended where the firs thickened and the wind had begun to sweep over the hill. Beyond that, the ground was scattered and uneven. He could have gone anywhere. Likely, he had. Mira didn't call out. She didn't step off the porch. Instead, she reached up and gently pulled the tuft of fur from the rail. It was dry, carried no scent, but it was his. No other fox had that coat, that mixture of gray and dusted ash, as if fire had touched it without burning. He had returned, not to be seen, not to stay, just to be near. For a long moment she stood still, the kettle cooling in her hand, the silence thick around her. The tracks behind her would melt by afternoon. The fur might blow away by nightfall, but the image remained. Quiet, deliberate, complete. She thought of the torn snare, the untouched rabbit. The path he'd taken after stepping out of the crate. None of it was certain. None of it proved anything. But something had changed. Ash had come back. Just once, without sound, without need, and in that he'd left something greater than presence, a trace of choice. As the wind rose slightly through the trees, Mira placed the tuft of fur in the curve of her palm. Then let it drift to the snow. It rested there a moment, caught in the light, then vanished into the cold. In the weeks that followed, the snow hardened into thick crusts along the north-facing slopes. The wind came lower through the trees now, rattling branches stripped bare. Life in the valley slowed. But something beneath that quiet began to shift. Mira continued her circuit, walking the old trap lines, checking flagged spots, cutting what she could reach. It was part of her routine now. Part work, part responsibility, part habit she couldn't shake. And yet something began to unsettle that rhythm. It started with a pattern too clean to dismiss. A snare flagged 2 weeks earlier now lay fully disarmed. The spring uncoiled, the anchor pulled from the soil. No sign of animals nearby. No blood, no fur, just the metal parts left scattered beside the root as if someone had dismantled them carefully. Then another. 2 days later, down by the frozen creek bed, a small jaw trap that had been lodged in the crook of a tree root now sat upside down, the tension bar pried loose, the bait untouched. Nearby, tracks circled the trap site, light and deliberate. Mira crouched beside them. Same narrow pad prints, same slight outward angle on the back right foot, a familiar asymmetry. Not a coincidence, not wind, not time. She made no report. There was nothing to report, not in the formal sense. No missing wildlife, no property damage, just deactivated traps in places few others went. But she marked them on her ledger all the same. By the third instance, it became undeniable. The snare sites weren't just failing. They were being found. Someone, or something, was removing them. With intent, with precision. She didn't speak about it to Halverson. He wouldn't call it impossible, but he would call it projection. Recovery stories made people hopeful, he'd say. They wanted signs that animals remember, that they return changed. Mira didn't need that. She wasn't asking for miracles, but facts left tracks and she knew how to read them. It was dusk the next time she saw him, if it was him at all. She'd gone north toward the edge of the ridge just before the descent into the valley. The light was low, slanted across the snow in long blue shadows. She stood near a split cedar, writing her last notes when movement caught her eye at the far side of the clearing. A single shape, small, low, unmoving. Ears, gray, not pale like winter hares, not black-tipped like the younger foxes still roaming the brush in small family units. These were ash-colored, edged with rust. Still, she didn't move. The figure held position just long enough for the light to catch the slope of the shoulders, the turn of the face. Then it was gone. No sound, no blur, just absence. Mira remained at the tree until the sun slipped behind the ridge. She made no call. I took no photos. marked nothing in the ledger. There was no proof, just a moment, spare and clean, that slipped past the world unnoticed. She never saw him again, not in the yard. Not in the shelter woods, but the pattern continued. Every few days another sprung trap rendered useless, another bait left untouched, another trail of small paw prints circling but never caught. Some of the others began to notice, too. A field ranger once joked that the foxes must be unionizing. Mira only nodded. She didn't need to explain. Ash hadn't come back for comfort. He hadn't returned for her. Whatever passed between them had ended the day he stepped into the trees. But he hadn't disappeared. He had learned something, not from her hand, but from the cage, from the pain, from the moment he'd dragged himself through snow and silence with steel on his leg and still found breath. What he did with that knowledge was his alone. But Mira knew this much as she packed up her gear and walked down the ridge in the last stretch of winter light. Some things heal, some things vanish, and some things keep moving, quietly, just beyond the edge of what can be named.